Game Schooler Podcast is a weekly audio show that educates new and experienced gamers about the awesomeness of tabletop gaming. In this week's episode, we'll cover Forbidden Jungle, our game of the week, discuss adapting hobby games to classrooms in the School of Gaming, and wrap it up by revealing our high five classic games that deserve more respect. Welcome to the Game Schooler Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Kotecki, along with my co-host, Dr. Michael McCabe. How's it going, Michael?
What's going on, Doug? How are you?
Oh, I'm better this week, I think, with the technology errors out of the way. I mean, the previous week I accidentally posted the podcast early,
Which
and
was
as
fine.
punishment, we missed a week.
Yeah.
So that's technology karma coming back for you.
Well, Doug, I've got a story to tell you.
Uh-oh, diving right in.
You do so much for this podcast, and I am a person that struggles with guilt. You know, sometimes I need to carry my own weight. And this past weekend, I was out running errands for the house, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to do some research. And I think I even had like official Game Schooler gear on as well as I was running these errands around an unnamed town in southern Wisconsin. And there's a thrift store, a chain of thrift stores across the United States, maybe worldwide, but I didn't do research to that level. But the store is known as Goodwill. And it's right next to several grocery stores in this unnamed town in southern Wisconsin. Okay, you with me?
Yeah, it's next to a grocery store?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. This
I know
Goodwill
which...
is next to a series of grocery stores.
Okay, I'm fairly confident I know exactly which Goodwill you're talking about. Continue.
Okay, it's our friendly local Goodwill. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling like, you know, previous weeks I'd done some actual research with books and journals. This was in the field research, hoping to get a picture, hoping to put that picture up on our Discord and be like, see, we have magical games too. And Taboo in abundance. Monopoly, 14 different kinds I counted. Tons of DVD games, meaning the games require a DVD player to play it. Games such as Seen It and other. You smell what I'm stepping in, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I see a Spiel des Jahres still in the shrink.
Oh.
And as I see this game called Dixit, as my eyes are drawn, I had an immediate olfactory experience. I mean, like, my brain sees Dixit, but all of a sudden, my brain also realizes there is a smell that anyone who's ever worked in a middle school for more than 2 weeks in the spring will recognize. And it is a smell of odor, like severe body odor. And I got this as I was walking towards Dixit. You with me?
Yeah, one of those spring days where you wear a really warm hoodie, and by the afternoon it's 70 degrees, and you regret that decision.
No, you're not with
BO?
me. No, Doug. This is like, all right, I'll get there. Let me get there. I'm not quite there in my research. So I go and I look at Dixit, and it's like $9.99 still in the shrink. Nah, not even worth posting on Discord. I could probably find that on Amazon for $4.99. So it wasn't a good enough deal to make our Discord threshold of deals, right? Because these people find like Lost Ruins of Arnak for $3, right?
Yeah.
That's the type of thing you're seeing. You're seeing a $70 game, $3 at your friendly local Goodwill in Southern California or in the Chicagoland suburbs, not in Janesville, Wisconsin. Oops, I said it. Well, as I go to slide the game back on the shelf, my eyeball catches where the odor is coming from. And in the aisle next to me, but about 18 feet away, is a full-grown wizard. I mean, hat, robe, and beard. And the beard went down to the belly button. And that's what should have been my first time. But my brain was also not connecting things well. I think it's because of the smell. And I looked down and I thought, I think I used to teach art with that person. Not me. I never taught art, but I think that was a teacher, an art teacher, where I used to teach.
Was his name Gandalf the Grey?
No, it was Gandalf the Brown because it was a brown robe. It's like, I have to do a walk by, because if I do a walk by, the person's going to be like, McCabe, right? You know what I mean? And so as I'm doing a walk by, one, I confirmed that's where the odor was coming from. It was from the Full Grown Wizard. Two, I did not teach with this person because that person's beard did not go below, like, I don't know what to call it, male nipple level. Can we say that on our podcast? But you know what I mean?
I believe so.
This was full belly button beard. And then here's the icing on the research cake. I couldn't actually get through the aisle because this guy was like standing next to his other friend, and I had to do like the excuse me, little bit of awkward tight. They were full blown in a trance about a recent campaign that they had just finished. I think it was Dungeons and Dragons. Hey, don't send me hate mail or anything. I'm not saying that. This is my own personal lived experience from doing research in the field.
And we can't confirm that those aren't real wizards.
That's exactly where I was going. and the smell was from an era like pre-running water era. Doug, it was so bad. And I shop at that Goodwill. So I'm not trying, don't come at me with, oh, you're this or that. No. I buy my own, I'll buy clothes at Goodwill. I'll go to any thrift store, man. I like a deal. Whether it's a t-shirt or a board game or a dress shirt, give me that J. Crew out of that Goodwill for $3 instead of the $75. But so I'm not saying that. But man, holy cow, folks! Before you go to your friendly local Goodwill, make sure you throw some deodorant on under those armpits, especially if you're a full-grown wizard.
Yeah,
and that's my research gone wrong.
We don't know what Middle Earth or the Shire smells like, so that could be hope for them.
Man, and I was workshopping this a little bit as I took the kids to school. I told the full story yesterday when I was taking them to school. I've got a freshman in high school. She was just busting a gut laughing. Couldn't believe it. And there were a little bit more colorful language that I used too, but I learned a lesson. I'm not looking for deals in thrift stores where we live, Doug. They just don't exist.
They don't exist
like they do. I know, really. And it went wrong, man. The smell.
You paid the price.
4 days later, I've recovered.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I've got some kind of cool notes from the Discord server. If you're not familiar with that, gameschooler.com/Discord.
No reaction to that about seeing a full-grown wizard in our local Goodwill? You're not even surprised.
No, I've been to enough game conventions that's not alarming to me. The amount of things that I've seen, that's not even surprising anymore.
One more follow-up. This I will put in the Discord, and then I'll send it over to you. I was bumming around on GameFound the other day because I was wondering when my Huang is being delivered, the game by the good Dr. Reiner Knizia, and I saw this crowdfunding venture for, it's not just a backpack, it's not just a game storage. This is like my desk, Doug. And then there's this image of this person standing up with my desk on their back. And all I could think of was our experience at Gen Con, where that jabroni turned around with his board game table bag and almost cleared me out. So I will clip a screenshot as soon as we're done here, and I'll throw that up in the Discord so that folks can see it.
Yeah, the amount of things that I've seen at a convention, you're going to have to come up with something pretty amazing to furl my eyebrow.
Well, if my phone could capture smells, Doug, you would be amazed.
I'd probably be unconscious by the sounds of it. So anyway, some good things outside of hygiene in the Discord server. One of the posters there brought up something that we've talked about in the past, but I thought bears repeating, is the idea of taking a timeout and stepping away from a game if it's not working, and how big that can be. The idea of, Michael and I have played some games, and there's been times where I'm like, yeah, this isn't working for us. It's not working as a group. Let's move on. Let's play a different game. There's too much, not enough time and too many games to spend playing a game that you're not liking or isn't working. And if you are playing with kids, don't make a bad experience worse because that can just manifest itself in not wanting to play the next game. And maybe it's one of those situations like we just need to step away from it and we'll come back to it later with fresh minds and fresh ideas and things like that. I know we had some friends that were playing a game of Unlock and got stuck in a spot and they were trying to figure it out and they just kind of walked away and said, we'll come back to this when we're ready, but don't force that square peg into a round hole. So I think that's some good advice. Anitra on the Discord server brought up the idea of using roll and write and games that feature writing to improve handwriting. So if you're looking for something to
I could use that.
Increase some skills, we talk a lot about subjects here, but that's a great way to teach handwriting and just get them practicing. A game like Green Team Wins where your kids are writing stuff out, especially in a world today where everything's on keyboards and devices and phones, that's quickly becoming a lost art is handwriting. So those are some things I wanted to highlight there. Oh, the other thing too, this is bleeding into what's awesome in gaming, but it warms my heart, pun not intended, to see our subject and skill builders being used in the wild.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
Doug.
we've been getting some pictures, and some of the folks on the Discord have been using. We have skill builders, subject builders, and discussion guides that are free for anybody that signs up for the Discord. And they are activities and little booklets that can help you use and incorporate some of the most popular games in board gaming into game schooling. So if that's something that's really important to you or you're looking for some extra resources, go to gameschooler.com/Discord to check that out. Like I said, they're free, so enjoy and use them.
While some folks were learning to build a garden box or the fine art of sourdough bread during the pandemic, Doug and I did a deep dive into some curriculum, and that's where those came from. We have a lot of those guides out there, and it's just great to see that people are using them.
Those were our bonsai trees of the pandemic. What's awesome in gaming for you, Michael?
I don't really know where to start. I wanted to make sure that I told you about the actual wizard that I saw. It has been nice. So for folks who watch us, if you watch us on Spotify or YouTube, you'll notice the mustache is gone. When basketball season's over, mustache goes bye-bye. And my next up shelf, I mean, no shocker, I'm getting through games. So this Dungeons, Dice, and Danger by Sir Richard Garfield has been a nice little dungeon crawl rolling, right? If you can believe all of that I've been playing all by myself and will eventually get to the table with another human, maybe someday. But that was a suggestion that the Family Gamers had talked about, I think it was months ago. So just starting to plow through the never-ending list of games to want to try. And also, it's just nice to continue to see what else is out there. I know you and I have gone through a stack of games in the last 2 weeks, so I don't want to give them all away. I'll send it back to you if you want to mention a few of those. One is our game of the week today, which I'm really excited to talk about, but I can hold that excitement for another 90 seconds or so. How about you, Doug?
No, I mean, mine, I don't have any games, so I'll after I get done with my next point, I'll send it back to you, talk about whatever you want. I'll jump in where I feel necessary. But good news, Michael and I are heading back to Gen Con this year.
Yes, we
are. So that's
folks.
exciting and awesome in gaming, so we're looking forward
and
to
we're
that.
going to cover it.
We're going to cover it.
Full
all
coverage.
Of it. Every day, every second, we're going to see if we can find that wizard's family and anybody else that might be related to him.
We'll find it. They'll find us.
So pretty excited about that. That's going to be cool. So if anybody else is going to Gen Con this year, let us know in the Discord. And I don't know what will come of that.
Could be some magical meetups at the Steer Inn or
Yeah,
any
yeah, there you
other fine Indianapolis establishments. Maybe we'll surprise visit at the Pat McAfee show or find other celebrities of Indianapolis and just introduce ourselves, you know.
Probably.
Yeah.
Do a lap
good.
around the Indianapolis Speedway.
You'll LARP, not me. I'm going True Dungeon style. No, the other thing just to share about it, I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but my wife and our youngest is 8 now. It's hard to believe, but we played Las Vegas. Just a quick, we started it, played about the first 2 rounds before church, got home from church and wrapped it up. And we
Some
played a
gambling
lot.
before and after church.
Yeah,
Nice.
It goes well
Yeah.
on a Sunday with that family time. And Las Vegas, we've covered in a previous game of the week. You can hear where this episode is. This is an episode filled with shoddy research, folks. But we left, at that halfway point, and I was feeling really good. I mean, I was dominating, and then I absolutely got crushed in the second half. But we had something happen before that's never happened in that game. There was a tie. 510,000 to 510,000, and I was in lowly third place with 470,000. And the tiebreaker in that game is the most notes. So if you win the most banknotes at a casino, and my 8-year-old beat my wife by 1, and it was what was really interesting about that game was the amount of math that came from that one game. This is where my wife is a brilliant teacher. And is, I'm thinking in thousands, and Emmy is teaching our daughter the count buys, and adding up the banknotes and adding it up to 51 instead of 510,000. So it was just really interesting to see, in 30 minutes of time, broken up across a 4-hour period, the amount of not just fun and enjoyment that happened from that game, but when a game is designed well and when a game has an awesome, tiebreaker mechanism, it can lead to additional fun and learning.
Yeah.
So we had that happen over the weekend. Certainly something I didn't plan. It was nice to be able to just jump onto the floor and play a little Las Vegas on the carpet. So,
Yeah, it is amazing the amount of the skills and subjects are there when you want to find them all over the place, and they're just there for the taking. So that's cool. Anything else you want to talk about, Michael?
no, I think I'm good. I'm ready to get into our game of the week. Las Vegas was episode 113. Thanks. I tried to do a delay to give you an assist to jump in there, Doug, but I got the assist myself. So
All right.
definitely, though, that has become a McCabe family favorite for multiple play groups. So a game you'll probably continue to hear me talk about over the next few months.
Awesome. Reminder again, if you're interested, gameschooler.com/Discord. Spread the word about the podcast if you like what we're doing and the content that we are providing. And contact us with any questions or comments, email at gameschooler.com. With that out of the way, let's head over to the game of the week.
The game of the week. The game of the week is an in-depth look at a family-friendly game we think you should try if you get the chance. This week's game was super fun. It's called Forbidden Jungle. Doug, give us the stats.
All right. Published in 2023 by GameRight. The designer is Matt Leacock. Art is by CB Kanga, and 2 to 5 players, 45 minutes. Ages 10 plus on the box. Board Game Geek says 8 plus. I'm going to defer to the 10 plus. And this is going to fall in our family game category as a cooperative game. In Forbidden Jungle, your team has crash landed on a mysterious jungle planet, and you need to work together to survive. Search the ruins of an abandoned outpost for an elusive escape portal, all while fending off an ever-growing horde of venomous creatures and escalating chain of collapsing locations. Shift tiles to power up the portal and live to see another day. Your goal is to surround an empty portal with illuminated crystal tiles and get all of the adventures there. You lose if you need to place an enemy or spider web on the board and the supply is empty. if the threat level reaches the top, if an adventurer loses all of their health, or you get trapped because of a tile collapse, or if one of the illuminated crystals is removed from play. On your
that
turn,
it?
you're going, yeah, that's it. Those are the only 800 ways you can lose
Only
the game.
6 loss conditions.
Yeah. On your turn, you're going to take 4 actions. You can move, so move about the island, which is represented by a set of tiles placed out on the board. If you've played Forbidden Island or Forbidden Desert, same type of philosophy there. So you can move along the island orthogonally. You can remove, which take a remove action, which you can remove the eggs, hatchlings, and adults and spider webs. So there's 3 levels of venomous creatures. Start out as eggs, turn into hatchlings, and eventually adults. You can explore, which means if a tile is empty, you can flip it over to its actual side. So at the beginning of the game, all of the tiles outside of the tile that you start on are flipped face down. You don't know what is on them. So you have to explore to find the tiles that you need to find those portals and the crystals to be able to move them around. That type
Which
of
is
thing.
a ton of fun.
So the other thing is when you flip over tiles, sometimes there is a gear icon on them which allow you to gain equipment. And equipment allows you to take special actions out of turn. They're free actions to help you in your progress. And the last thing you can do on your turn is operate a machine. So some of the tiles, as you flip them over, have machines that will allow you to do something. So, for example, there's one that allows you to slide the tiles around. One allows you to destroy tiles. Some allow you to move the creatures one way or the other. There is my favorite card in the game, which is the Electrifier, which is kind of like a giant bug zapper. So if you can get the creatures to go on there, they're immediately wiped out. After you take your 4 actions, you are going to reveal threat cards depending on the threat level, which is also the difficulty modifier of the game depending on where you start. So you start out in a normal game drawing 2 threat cards, and they're going to tell you what to do. You're going to be moving creatures around. You're going to be spawning new creatures. You're going to be growing new creatures. They're going to be spinning webs, and parts of the jungle are going to collapse. Eventually, the threat will increase, which leads to drawing more and more threat cards. All that to say, you are using those actions and machines in order to move the tiles around in the jungle, in order to surround 1 portal tile with 4 illuminated crystal tiles on each side, and then get all of your adventurers there. You win the game. Again, like I said, there's 6 or 7 loss conditions, but that is how you play Forbidden Jungle. What do you like about it, Michael?
I really enjoyed it's hard to not make comparisons to games in the other Forbidden series. So I'll just start with what I really enjoyed about Forbidden Jungle is that the tiles are flipped, and that initial exploration of I'm going to go this way to see what's over on this side of the board. Are you going to follow me over here, or are you going to go in your own direction? I enjoyed that whenever we played the game. It was always different because of that hidden information becoming public information in a cooperative. It just worked really well from the start of the game. And there's a little bit of tension as tiles disappear. So those are my 2 favorite pieces of this game that I think will continue to bring me back to it and want to show this to other people.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned I love the Electrifier. I think that's such a cool tile. Can't get away from it. The other thing that's
You
cool
searched
is
for it too. In future games after the first one, you were looking for it, like, oh, where is that? I
where
gotta go
is it?
find it.
It's so helpful. So
Yeah.
helpful because those monsters start to increase and can start swarming faster than you think. I really enjoy the equipment cards in this game that add another level of wrinkle of giving you cool actions for people to do. And then each character, like Pandemic and the other Forbidden games, has a special ability, which is really cool. One of the things that I really enjoy about this game and appreciate is the simplicity of the threat cards, because they don't waste a lot of time. You flip them over, you do what they say, They're fairly self-explanatory. Once you do it, there's no extra shuffling. You don't have to remember, oh, is this one still in the deck? Kind of the way that you do in Pandemic or Forbidden Jungle. And I have played a lot of games where the cooperative, the upkeep in between turns when the game is doing their turn sometimes can get so overcomplicated that you need this flow chart of like, all right, did we do this? Did we reset that? Did we do this? And it gets kind of burdensome. And this one,
there's a really good pace to this game.
Keeps it moving. It does a really good job. I know, like you said, it's very hard to talk about this game without comparing it to the others. And the only thing that I'm going to say, or I will say about that, is it feels like it takes really good parts of Forbidden Island, mixes them with really good parts of Forbidden Desert, puts them together, but it's a very unique game and doesn't have that Pandemic clone type of feel. So Forbidden Island,
that's a good point.
Forbidden Island very much feels like a junior version of Pandemic. Forbidden Desert, they tried to branch out with some of the moving tiles and shifting things. And this, they put some of those concepts together, but it feels like its own unique game. It doesn't feel like it really does feel like a continuation of the season or the series without being a retread.
Well, and the decisions, I think, especially if you're playing with, kids and playing with grandparents or parents, or even if you're facilitating a group with younger gamers, the decisions of what of the insects or bugs or monsters, whatever they're actually called in the game, do we want to try to get rid of because of how they spawn, right? You've got these eggs that turn into little insects that turn into big nasties. And if you ever run out of any of them, like you said in the beginning of the segment, game over. So if you've placed all of the eggs, suddenly now whoever's turn it is, there's a sense of urgency and focus of, I need to clear out some of the eggs, because if the next threat card that we turn over, whether we have to turn over 2 or 3 of them, if it means I have to place another egg, we could lose. So I love that level of prioritization and focus that comes about in the cooperative. In that's different from certainly Forbidden Island. That's more of a hobby game or a gamer game type of, this is the group's priority, we must do this now, distilled down into a family game.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned it is really cool, the kind of the circle of life to those creatures where, eggs
I'm not singing, Doug.
Eggs turn into, we haven't paid for that copyright, so we can't anyway. Eggs turn into the hatchlings, and the hatchling turn into adults, and the adults and the hatchlings are the only one that can sting you. But then new eggs come out by the adults, so it's kind of always this struggle of like, well, if we need to get rid of the eggs now, because if the adults spawn eggs, we're not going to have enough to fill up the board. And if we get rid of those, then they can't turn into hatchlings. But, and it's always this kind of discussion back and forth of like, which level of creature is are we at most risk of right now? Which I think is cool.
Yeah, and at least when you and I played, and when we played with other people, I didn't feel like that led to alpha gaming or quarterbacking, or one person's going to take over, because the priority is so clear. I mean, if you go into the box and you announce, we just played the last egg, everybody at the table knows, okay, who's going to help clear out the eggs.
Yeah.
The other thing that did become quite clear, at least in repeated plays, is that each ability can, should, ought to be used as often as possible. So although I have 4 actions, I need to keep in mind that if my ability involves moving other players, I'm going to want to move other players. If my ability involves clearing out more creatures, I'm going to want to try to do that. And that didn't feel old or stale. Because how many are there? 8 different? Something like that. There were quite a few, and I'll look that up.
There's 6 different. Yeah, there's 6 different characters,
and that seemed to allow for some replayability, where I felt like I was able to do. I liked that I was able to try out those different character abilities and have a very different game feel.
Well, and I think it's a good ratio of using. I think in all the games that we played, I think maybe 2 or 3 times per game I used my special ability out of maybe 10 or 15 turns. So maybe a quarter, a little bit less than a quarter of the time. And I like that because sometimes you play the games and it's like, well, my ability, I just need to do that every time. And this game, you didn't do it every time. And it made it feel a little bit more special or not beating you over the head of like, well, I guess I have to heal every turn and I don't get to play the rest of the game. I just have to do my one thing, where it's like if your thing is clearing monsters or whatever, like, well, I guess I just have to go clean the monsters for everybody and I don't get to flip any tiles and get any equipment or things like that. So it's like I felt like it was the right amount of special ability usage, that it didn't overstay its welcome or pigeonhole you into a certain route that's like you couldn't pivot away from it. But there certainly are times where it comes in handy. I think this is one that if you're playing with younger players, to be aware that you're going to be doing more facilitating the younger the player is. And that's just a nature of the amount of variability in the game. Not that the game is complicated, but when you're talking about, okay, the amount of options available to a player of, okay, you 4 actions, you can do any 4 of these as many times as you want. So if you want to move 4 spaces, great. But among that movement is like, do you want to explore something? Do we want to take out some of these creatures? Do you want to do this? So there are a lot of options available to players. So the younger you go, you're going to have to fill in and facilitate a little bit more of that, take a little bit more of that agency away from them to kind of not necessarily not give them the choice, but show them all of the choices that are available towards working towards a common goal. And being cooperative, that can be helpful. It doesn't seem like you're stepping on players' toes.
Like I just stepped on your toes there with interrupting. I think that's a really good point. Having just played Forbidden Island and introduced that to my 8-year-old within the last couple months with my wife, I cannot imagine having her have an enjoyable experience. And age is different, right? Kiddos are different.
Yeah.
But with Forbidden Jungle, and the reason is because of getting to that end game. In order to get to the end game, you have to surround a portal with active crystals, right? And that involves moving tiles around and triggering other tiles to get those tiles moved around, and a level of teamwork, not only where you would be limiting the other person's agency, but it takes some directions. And not just direction following, but a level of comprehension that I really think the floor of this game is at about that 10-year-old for most 10-year-olds. Now, as soon as we say that, somebody could jump in the forum and say, my 2.5-year-old, I played this with them right before we played Twilight Imperium 3rd edition. It is more, I think that 10, 11, 12-year-old, because I don't see a group of 8-year-olds being able to play this game independently. No. And when I see that age on Board Game Geek, whether it's Outfoxed or any of the other games that we've talked about, can an adult just sit back and facilitate and be there to help with the rules and answer questions? Not with this one. The adult needs to play.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out is, like most of the Forbidden series, the components on this game are awesome.
Oh, they're fantastic.
Really cool creature tokens and things like that. So that is, and as always, the price is fairly affordable coming from Game Right. So they're doing a lot of great things. Still disappointed it comes in a tin, so be aware of that.
I love the tin. That was Doug, not Michael. You could send all tins to Michael, not Doug. What about Forbidden Sky? That's also in the series, right? You're not a fan of that? That one I know was not well regarded by a lot of reviewers. Yeah,
that one. I think
I haven't played it, so that's why I'm asking.
No, it was a cool concept. You were trying to kind of connect circuits together to blast off the ship. In practice, it just didn't work out and added a little bit. Don't want to say complexity, but it was just a little bit more fiddly than it should have been.
Okay.
and just didn't work very well, in my opinion.
Forbidden Jungle was not fiddly. It was
No.
straightforward. It was direct. I had fun just talking about the different choices, and
I think one of the big things for this, if we're going to put down one word for this game that I wanted to stress about it, is that it's very engaging. This is an engaging game. When you sit down at the table and people are invested, you are sucked into that kind of world, and everything else falls by the wayside as you're trying to figure out and tapping into a lot of cool concepts of exploring and battling and puzzling all in the same game. Does a really good job, in my opinion, of sucking players in and focusing on the task at hand.
and I would just also add variability with that. So I think if you take engaging, which is outstanding, but we played the first game at novice, I believe, or did we start at the medium difficulty?
Yeah.
And then in the expert level, you start the game by flipping over 3 threats. Is that the only difference? Do I have that right?
There is a standard, a novice, probably insanity.
Yeah, but
Legend, elite, standard, novice, elite, and legendary.
thank you, Doug.
Yes.
Thanks for having that rule book handy and being accurate. It's important when you're talking about a board game. And being able, I can't imagine going right into that legendary, but there's that challenge out there, right? So if it's an adult gamer group and you're playing with 4 adults that you always play games with and you want to try it, you can give it a try. I like that level of variability, especially with the 6 different
And we lost the
roles
last
that you
game we
could take
played,
on.
right?
Yes, we did.
By
there
like
was
one
nothing
turn,
we could do about it.
Which
Yeah.
was awesome. Like if you come down to
And
one
that
of
was
the
not
final
on
turns.
novice. Just to be clear, so people don't leave our show. We didn't start that one on novice. So
No,
we've played
it's-
this multiple times.
And it came down to the wire, which is something that I think you always want in a cooperative game. Is I don't want it to be a blowout. I don't want to get blown out. Let's make it go down to the wire and see who comes out on top. Another thing that's awesome with this, and it comes up with a lot of cooperative games, is the amount of skills that show up in a game like this. You've got group discussion, cooperation, decision making, communication, time and resource management, spatial perception, risk management, and logistics, all wrapped up in this tiny 45-minute game. Is pretty cool to have all of those represented in a single game.
Yeah, along with comprehension and processing information and a handful of other skills. And what I love about Forbidden Jungle and some of the cooperatives we've been talking about recently is the conversational flow that happens in the gameplay. So it allows people, Doug and another guy that helps us with a lot of games that comes to game night, they are very fast processors. And I'm usually about a second to a second and a half to a minute and a half behind. But while they're zooming ahead, I am able to look at the board in a different way and maybe blurt out one possibility or every so often. And I still feel like I'm contributing. And I mean that in a great way. I think that also works with kids, where kids can look at the board and see about different ways of moving around, or I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to explore these 3 tiles over my next 4 turns. Okay, you do that. But while you're doing that, can you also clear out some of those insects or eggs? And Forbidden Jungle allows for that. You don't just have to go in complete lockstep and say, this is what we will do. This is the only way for us to win. There's multiple paths towards victory in the game.
Well, and I think it's something, too, that I think it's really cool when it happens. And I think it happened a couple times the last time we were playing, is that every once in a while you can have a kid that will then just out of nowhere say, well, I could do this.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I remember I've got this ability, or I've got this equipment card, or I've got this, and kind of jumps out and contributes something. You're like, yeah, that is the best move. We should do that.
Yep.
And it's that opportunity that is there, that exists, that even when you are facilitating as an adult or guiding the game along and trying to be as not like an alpha gamer, but also knowing that you need to be a little bit, depending on the age group of the players that you're playing with, that there are still opportunities for them to jump in and participate is really cool.
And we had that happen when we played with your daughter. Her role allowed she could take gear and equipment and give it to other players at one point in the game, and she was clearly the expert with her role. So she was assigning different equipment to her dad and to me during the game, and we're trusting that kiddo to do it because she knows her role. And I like that the game allows for that, right? I might have an ability, Doug might have an ability, but we don't have to manage each other's ability and role. It just seems to be really well balanced that way.
Yeah, phenomenal game. Anything else you want to talk about? All right, Well, that is our game of the week. Give it a try if you get a chance. I don't think you'll regret it. If you happen to see it on a demo shelf in a game store or at a convention library, that is our game of the week, Forbidden Jungle by Gamewright.
The School of Gaming. In the School of Gaming, we discuss concepts, keywords, etiquette, and helpful ideas in the world of gaming. This week, we're going to discuss hobby games in the classroom.
Yeah, this comes as a question from us, from one of the listeners, Nathan, who wanted to know about adapting hobby games for the classroom, time, space, and copies. I'm assuming we're going to be... I kind of took the approach of talking about our definition of hobby games. I don't know if the question was just in board games in general, as far as hobby games as opposed to mass market games. How do you get hobby games in the classroom? But I think one of the big things is if you're talking about hobby level games, it depends on if you're focusing on skill building or subject building, depending on what you're introducing into the classroom. And go ahead.
No, you got it.
No, go ahead.
And if there's content that you want to introduce, I do think that there's some board games that take very difficult topics and introduce them in a manner that, I don't want to say gets the teacher off the hook, but the game is actually the media then, and it's not the opinion of the adult in the room. And so that's all that I was going to add in. So you can kind of do a blend of the skill and subject.
Yeah, I think if you're going to use hobby games, it's more on the idea of, like you said, introducing or reinforcing something. Because I think if you want straight skill building and you want to introduce skill building into the classroom, you can accomplish that with a lot of family weight games, no matter where you are in grade level or experience, that type of thing. There are a lot of family weight games that will teach experiences or skills. You know, something like Green Team Wins or other roll and writes or things like that, and they're much easier to expand to a large classroom and multiple player counts. So if we're talking about hobby games, which means, you know, in our scale, we've got family games, light hobby games, and hobby games. These are going to be more complicated games that are essentially designed for gamers. So how do you bring those into the classroom? And for me, I think that these are a great tool. These are not games that I would recommend that you are going to bring in 5 or 6 copies of a game, divide up into groups of 4, and have everybody playing these games in class. To me, they work as using the gameplay for visualization or understanding concepts. So the idea of something like Freedom, the Underground Railroad, where you can lay it out and play through some turns as an entire group and see how it's working as a visualization of understanding that complex and tricky subject. Or a game like Raccoon Tycoon, where you're talking about stock market and how supply and demand works and kind of creating a visual representation of that for groups to see, as opposed to necessarily we are going to sit down and play an entire game of Raccoon Tycoon as a hobby level game. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm just going to read Nathan's question directly so that folks in the Discord who are in the classroom and educators and gamers and homeschoolers can respond, because this is an area where I think the more thoughts, the more opinions we get, the better off we could be. And Nathan had 2 questions over 2 different years. The first one came from October of 2023. I think these were both an email to Doug and I. So this question: how can you adapt the ideas of hobby games into a classroom when you don't have the time, space, copies to include all 30 students? So similar, but the second question I think is even more specific. And this one came in September of 2021. So clearly a high school science teacher that wants to get hobby games in the classroom. Here it is. I'm a high school science teacher. I want to incorporate more games in my classes, but many of the games that would work in my classes play only 4 to 5 people and are longer than 55-minute period. How can I overcome some of these issues in the classroom? And I don't know. I don't know if you really can. I mean, especially if a game is designed for 2.5 hours and given some of the constraints. So let's pretend that the only constraint is time. The only constraint is a 55-minute class. And for a moment, I'm going to pretend that money is not a constraint, right? So if money's not an option and you have beautiful science tables, well, maybe you trade in 4 of those beautiful science tables and you get 4 game tables so that you can actually save the game. Because when I look at the problems, and there's a reason why we haven't, addressed this directly before and why we're waiting until now, I don't have the answers, and I think we need to take it to our group a little bit. If you're trying to get hobby games into a science classroom, the difficulty is going to be in saving that game state and bringing people back when you only have 55 minutes.
I disagree, and I've got 2 approaches that I haven't put into practice, and I have no opportunity to, but I think that they are recent developments that have changed in the way of gaming that I think could work. And the first one is taking advantage of solo modes and playing with the entire class as a single team in a game, which would only require the teacher to be responsible for saving the game state. It's not separate players or kids setting up or taking down or things like that. And it is something that 5 years ago probably would have been almost non-existent. But with the proliferation of solo gaming becoming a thing, I think this is more of a real possibility. Okay. And I think it is one of those situations where it comes back to showing the process, and maybe you have the kids vote on every turn just by raising their hands. Like, here are our 2 options. What are we going to do? Vote, and then that's what you do, and you move on, and you kind of go along and do that game as a process in the solo mode. The other option is, I think, turning a lot of those games into mini cooperative games, in the idea of putting 3 or 4 kids, maybe 5, into one of the players and acting as one player in a mini group and taking their turns that way. You could get around that player account. I don't think you're ever going to get into a situation where you can have more than one copy going at a time and hope to save it. Like, that's just not feasible. But I think with solo play and dividing kids up into teams to act as a single player in a 4-player game, where that burden of saving the game state, setting it up, and getting it ready falls on the teacher, makes it more plausible that you could stretch it over 2 or 3 game period or class periods in a week instead of trying to fit it in one period. So
that's really interesting. Both strategies are very interesting if your goal is to play the game. Mm-hmm. And I want to just go back to where you started at the beginning of the segment, where is it for subjects or skills? At MIT and the University of Wisconsin, there was some work done, and this is about 15 years ago, and a lot of the professors have moved on to other universities, but around this concept of a worked example. Yeah. And a worked example is you are going to present and work through the example. And I wonder if taking that theory and concept of a worked example and bringing it into the actual game. So we're not going to play the game. We're not going to be able to sit around and play the game Newton, but we are going to talk through and work through this game. And is that a possibility? So the students are not going to actually going to be able to sit down and play the game Newton, but they're going to work through some of the different mechanisms and concepts and actually be able to look at the game. That's one thing that I wonder about, because that constraint of time, even if you have a kidney table or a table where the game can stay set up, possibly, there just seem to be some constraints there that I'm having a hard time working through.
Well, the other concept is the idea of, I think of a game like, two of them that I'm thinking of is Freedom, the Underground Railroad, but then another one is Campaign Trail, which we've talked about in the past on this show.
Yep.
And having that set up and not even playing the game, but talking about the mechanisms of the game and how closely tied they are to how the real world works or worked in the history, that representing that by cubes and saying, okay, here, notice how I've registered more voters in here. Now I have the lead, and that is going to give me those electoral college votes, and that's going to move that over here. Having that kind of visualization of explaining of like, well, if I do more advertising and I advertise on these issues or I campaign here, these numbers are going to go up, and just kind of teaching that structure and using the game as a teaching tool without playing the game, in the same way of talking about the restraints in Freedom, the Underground Railroad. It was like, I'm trying to do all of this good work, and this is what keeps happening. These slave catchers keep coming back up and stopping me from doing what I'm trying to do. And to visualize that, I think, is another great way. If you're talking about science, I got to believe that there's ways to incorporate the, periodic and some of the, what I can't think of what the cell biology one is. Cellulose, and some of those games in that concept, in a almost a demonstration of why it works, in addition to if you're not playing the game.
Yeah, I like it. I like it, Doug. And I think part of the reason why I'm struggling with it, though, is that if I'm running a middle school board game club after school, right, and I know I only have an hour, hobby games are not coming with me. Family plus light hobby, sure, I can bring those, I can get those. But to the question about hobby games, and I don't want to do air quotes serious games, but all the games you've mentioned and games that we've even talked about in the School of Gaming segment before, Smartphone Inc. is another great example from Arcane Wonders of a game that teaches the supply chain, right? If you're in a any type of business ed class, what game teaches a supply chain better than Smartphone Inc.? I'm still struggling getting that into a class unless I have 90 minutes, and maybe it's just thinking about how to use those minutes more creatively.
I don't know. I think if you're thinking about it as how am I going to get kids playing this game, you will never win that. It's impossible because there is not enough time. You cannot. That just like the concept of I'm going to get 25 kids or 30 kids in my classroom to sit down and play any of the games that we've talked about is an impossibility. There's no way to physically set all those games up, play them, take them down, put them up the next day. It just doesn't work. So you have to figure out other ways to utilize those if you want to utilize them, because I think they still are great tools. And that's where you are limiting those save game states to teachers and not the students. And you're just not going to be able to do a Smartphone Inc. with an entire classroom unless you divide it up.
So you said you disagreed, so I'm trying to figure out what you're disagreeing with what I'm saying. I think we're saying the same thing, aren't we? Or what are we saying differently? I hear what you're saying about one centralized copy that the teacher is using and showcasing to the classroom.
I feel like I'm hearing you thinking about that there is a way, or trying to come up with a way to incorporate it into the classroom play-wise or in an after-school club. And I'm just saying flat out, like, I don't think it's possible at all.
Yeah,
in any
I think
way.
you could play a part of a game. You can do
Yeah.
a round of a game. You could show the game and then have an event, 2 hours in the evening or on a weekend, and try to bring people back if they want to play the full game. But even those ifs, that would require you to have multiple copies. That would require you to have at least 3 interested people who want to invest, right? I like
Well,
your
that-
idea about facilitating, centralizing the game.
Well, and I think the other thing too is it's like you and I have talked about, we have family members and people that we play games with, and some of them are going to be able to handle certain levels, and some of them, once the complexity level gets up to a certain level, like they're just tapping out. You're not going to
Yeah.
get 30 kids, even if you're in like the gifted class, that are going to be interested in actually playing that game.
Well,
And I feel like if you do some of that, whether solo mode or team mode or just using it as a teaching aid, you can bring along those kids that are not interested or fully invested for the journey, that are never going to come back for a special game night. They're not going to play the game. If you set them out, they're going to be the ones that are just dragging the game down for the 2 kids at the table that are really interested.
yeah, and that's the good news that I was hoping to share with this segment. To Nathan's question, how can you adapt the ideas of hobby games into a classroom? I think you can use the games as companion pieces and artifacts. So if you're willing to take apart parts of your game from your own personal collection, you can bring a lot of game boards into the classroom. You can bring in components and pieces, and they can be manipulatives that you can use with your lesson. Yeah.
Yeah,
You can bring in the game periodic. You can show the board. In Newton, you can bring in some of the components. That's where I kind of end that from the hobby game world. And I've played not a lot, but a handful of games that are thematically based on scientists. And I still can't see how to get that full game played without. But I'd love to hear what people in our Discord have to say, because I know we have teachers and educators and smart people out there.
I think the big thing is you have to know what you're trying to do with it, right? And if you think you're just like, I want to play this game because it's the subject matter is the same or whatever, like that's just not going to work. It's not feasible. And I think the idea of playing around and even just correlating the mechanisms to real life and how those work and how they're, because sometimes those decisions can be, reading them out of a textbook can be rather abstract, but when I see them and what my choices are, it becomes a little bit more clear of, wow, this kind of is a difficult decision. Or yeah, like even in something like Campaign Trail, how do I spend, I have this much money, how do I spend it? How do I make it and then you can have the entire conversation of like, geez, why does it seem like every presidential election they only spend time in 3 states? And Campaign Trail can show that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. They're just not, let's sit down and play the game, So like Michael said, a great thing for our Discord. I'd love to hear, and Michael would as well, if there's other ideas or things, and maybe people have already done this. So feel free to share that with us. We'd appreciate it. With that out of the way, let's move on to the high five for this week. All right, I'm cutting back in here. Michael and I were having a discussion off the air, and it just kind of occurred to me that it would be possible, potentially, to have
Allegedly.
a board game arena set up, and then just project it onto to the front of the classroom and playing in a solo mode or I guess you could still do the team mode of having multiple players, but the pro of that is there is absolutely no setup. Everything is set up ready for you. and then you just close that tab of the browser and bring it back up a day later and finish the game over multiple days, potentially. So it's just another kind of option that maybe using the digital world is an opportunity there. Even some games that have app versions, maybe not necessarily the Board Game Arena version, but just something for iOS and screencast your game of Ticket to Ride or whatever up onto the main screen of the classroom and play away and then save it and come back to it later. And maybe it's one of those things that you take an analog and make it a digital to solve that nut. Any pushback on that, Michael?
No, go solve that nut and let us know how you solved it.
All right, now back to your regularly scheduled program. If you're anything like us, you're constantly on the hunt for new games to check out. This week, Michael and I are going to be talking about classic games that deserve more respect. In our hobby, there seems to be this trend of something that came out a while ago that was all the rage and became popular for some reason, and now it's the hobby's duty to poo-poo all over that game. And Michael and I want to shine a light on some classic games that have been out for a while. My newest game is from 1979. How about you?
Ooh, yeah, I've got newer games than that, but my number 5 on my list is from 1956. We may have some crossover, so I won't say a ton about it, but that is Yahtzee.
No, but that's a great choice. I didn't even think
Edwin
about
S.
it.
Lowe is the designer. One of the artists on Yahtzee is a little-known artist named Charles M. Schultz. Yep.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
Brown.
Bob Ross.
No, not maybe he
art is
was,
there
but
on
I just
Yahtzee?
didn't see him on the full credits on BGG. But Yahtzee, you're going to roll dice to try to get different combinations, and it's such a classic that it is also its own mechanism. Yeah, you'll often. I was just listening to a fantastic interview on the 5 Games for Doomsday with Alan R. Moon, the designer of Ticket to Ride, and he talked about the Yahtzee mechanism. I mean, it is a mechanism of where he was talking about the game Ganz Schön Clever. That's so clever, where you're not only going to get to roll your dice once, not only going to get to roll your dice twice, but whatever it gets rolled for that third and final time, you're stuck with it. That is a Yahtzee mechanism. So that's my number 5, and a game we still have in our house. We still like to play, and I love a good dice chucker, and I think Yahtzee deserves some more love.
Yeah, that is a great choice. Didn't even think about it. I just went. This is a list that I completely went from the top of my head, and made it. So my number 5 came out in 1979. Newest game on my list from Hasbro and designers Theo and Ora Koster. That is Guess Who, which I think still holds up as a solid game. There's certainly been a bunch of variations and reworkings of this game, whether you want a Star Wars version or any other licensed property. I'm pretty sure you can get one. But Guess Who is a great deduction game. It was one that my kids play and was one of those first ones that they were introduced to, of a simple concept of, all right, let's narrow down our choices. And the fact that it doesn't require a notepad, you kind of flip as you go, I think is what makes it such a great early deduction game for young kids. And I think it still holds up today. Maybe the artwork is a little bit questionable by today's standards, but it does work well. That is my number 5, Guess Who.
Awesome, Doug. This is going to be a fun list. My number 4 has a weight on Board Game Geek of 3.66 out of 5.
Woo!
I should check and see how many ratings that. Oh, wow. And that's with 2,767 ratings. It is age 6+. It is 2 players. And the year, according to Board Game Geek, is 1475.
Oof.
That is chess.
Okay. It's
Number
gonna go
4
there
for me.
There or go.
Well, yeah. 2-player abstract, just a game. I think especially in my heart, there's a sentimentality because I always wanted to beat my dad in chess. And this is one of the earliest games that I can remember growing up in the Midwestern United States. In the cold winter months, we would play a lot of chess. And once I hit about 5 or 6, he really played. and he just destroyed me for about 3 or 4 years straight. And I must have been 8 or 9, maybe 10 when I finally beat him. What I know is I learned the game in Iowa. My family moved to Wisconsin when I was 9 years old, and we were definitely living in Wisconsin the first time that I beat Dad in chess. But a game that I've also enjoyed teaching my own kids, a game that I've played in the classroom, and really seems to come and go. There seems to be ebbs and flows with chess as it becomes popular, and definitely a game that I haven't talked about in many high fives, but that's my number 4.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but you talked about it at the end there, like the ebbs and flows. I feel like this was a thing that now I think is a little bit more, I don't want to say cooler or palatable, but at the same time, like, I feel like when I was in grade school or middle school, like that was the epitome of nerd culture, was like the chess club is like, you are a geek nerd. And I think that has changed over time where, you know, when I was in 7th grade, the idea of playing chess would have been like, you're not hanging out with us tonight type of thing.
Yeah. Especially if that, you know, the 80s and 90s of athletes and jocks and nerds. I mean, chess was definitely not associated with athlete. And it's just always, you know, I still have a board and a set that was my dad's, and it's just a game that and full disclosure, I'm not very good. I was better. It's a game you have to play often to get good and stay good. I was probably better at 8 or 9 years old than I am today. So that's my number 4.
All right, great choice. My number 4 is the board game world's punching bag, and that is Monopoly, published in 1935 by Hasbro, Charles Darrow, and Elizabeth J. Maggie Phillips. Monopoly is one that I think this one gets so much hate because it's not played properly. Like, is that because if you play this game properly by the rules and you hold auctions, what are you laughing at?
I love my house rules, man. I love my house rules. Keep going.
If you have the auctions, the properties are gone quick. If you don't do the stupid free parking thing, people don't have an influx of cash, and people go bankrupt quickly. This is, you know, but when you add all these things on there, it's like, I mean, and I wasn't even raised properly with the rules. It wasn't until I was adult that I was like, wait a second. And I started playing like an app, and it's like, well, this moves along quickly. It's like, no duh, because that's the actual rules. Like when I was growing up, it was like, I landed on Boardwalk. I don't have the money, and I don't really feel like buying it. So your turn. And somebody else goes. And it's like, no, it gets auctioned and then it's done, you know, and people selling properties to raise cash. Like, this thing is a cutthroat game that we've nerfed away from its goodness. I think it's a solid game when played properly.
I want you to hold on to that logic because later in the segment, I think you're going to absolutely destroy me. So I do love your logic there. Okay, Doug? That's really good.
Okay. All right.
Monopoly made my short list. It's on my honorable mention. Number 3 is maybe I just have Matt Leacock on the brain, and this was our game of the week back in episode 5. But that's Pandemic. And I feel like Pandemic has become mainstream, almost evergreen, and now gets overlooked. And just the base game with the 4 options and how the virus is spreading across the world. It's just a fantastic game. And it's a game that you can play with 10, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. It's a game you can play with adults. It's a game that maybe people who don't play a ton of board games can also sit down and get a lot of joy out of. You know, it does take up to 2 hours if you're introducing it and getting it set up and playing it for the first time with people. But one that made my list. That's number 3 is Pandemic.
Yeah, great choice. I didn't put any what I would consider almost like modern classics that deserve more respect.
I see that now, but I should have covered caveats before I put my list together.
All right. My number 3 is a simple one from 1974, and it still works from Hasbro and Ned Strongen and Howard Wexler. That is Connect 4. I still think that this game is solid, still holds up. There's a reason that people make giant outdoor bar versions of this, because it's a fun little game to play. And certainly, the same way that people don't talk about Yahtzee or the other, games that we've talked about, it's like, I think this is one that just gets glossed over as kind of a pretty cool abstract game for what it is and how simple it is. And when you got a pretty sneaky sis that puts it down there for the Connect 4 and you lose and you just
hit
press
the bottom,
button
man.
Bottom and they all come out. It's delightful. Another game. I think every one of the games on my list, except maybe Monopoly. I played Monopoly Deal with my kids. My kids have been raised with these games in our house as solid games, and I think they still hold up.
Yeah, and that takes me into my number 2, a game that we've raised our children on, and that's dominoes. And what chess is to me and my dad, dominoes is to my wife and her mother. And so it's just a classic game. Board Game Geek has it dated all the way back to 1500. But folks, quit hating on dominoes. It's rated a 5.5 on Board Game Geek, ranked 23,791 overall. Are you kidding me? There's no way there's 1,382 abstract games that are better than dominoes. Give me a tin full of dominoes. Give me the little trains to set up on top when the community is no longer, or when it's open to the community because I can't play my train. Yeah. And it's one that I don't get to play as often as the rest of the people at my house. During basketball season, my wife plays dominoes a handful of times with a kiddo or two, but just we've had a ton of fun with it. And one that I think we'll always have a tin full of dominoes in our house. And so many different ways to play it. I'm talking about Mexican train dominoes. That's the way that we play it in our house. But that's number 2 for me is dominoes.
No, that's a great one. That was on my short list. One of my 2 honorable mentions was dominoes. These are all, for the most part, these are all games that families get together and can play, right? They play because there's not a lot of rules upkeep. They can dive right in. It seems to be a commonality and something that I think is missing from a lot of modern games, that's for sure. My number 2 was published in 1960 by Ruben Klamer and Bill Markham. This is The Game of Life from Hasbro. And
we're going to get some hate.
I don't care. This one is just fun, man. And it's, certainly there are parts of it that are outdated and the new ones have different, you're adding
give me
friends.
The car and the spinner.
And I want a small amount of gambling. I want to choose my job. I want to know the perils of not going to college. It's like I'd love to have a real modern version of this game, of what this looks like. It's like, do you want to? I want to be on my parents' couch till I'm 30. Let's do that path. There's a whole bunch of different things.
Why are you telling my life story, Doug?
Well, I thought it was time to share. But my kids, and maybe it's because I have 3 daughters that they get into the role-playing aspect of this game and just have a blast of, oh, look, I'm going on vacation, and I added a new friend to my car, and we're getting pets and all the stuff that goes along with it. My kids love this game. And it was one of the few games that I played as a kid growing up that I loved as well for those same reasonings as a basic concept of a role-playing game. I think this fits the bill of, all right, you're going to live out a fantasy life for a little bit here. So that's my number 2, The Game of Life.
Yeah, that's really good. My number 1, I'm so glad that Doug went on the logic and the rant that he did with Monopoly, because hopefully he'll permit me a little bit of latitude and grace here as I share my number 1 overall, which was Game of the Week back in episode 14, and that's Klaus Teuber's Catan, because I'm talking about just Settlers of Catan Race to 10. Don't give me a Seafarers expansion. Don't give me any special rules about and bring in, I really want to try this ancient Europe expansion. Catan has become its own universe that I feel like people have lost track of just the very basic race to 10 of Settlers of Catan with one house rule. You get to request the trade, and if everybody says no, the game is moving on. So
Yes.
kind of the opposite of what Doug said. I do put a house rule down where no. It's going once, going twice, 3 times. We're moving on. That person gets to take their turn. You did not get your way on your trade. So all that to say in Catan, there's a trading mechanism built into the game where you could trade resources, and the thing that kills that game is where you get that guy, and I'm saying that guy because I've never had a woman or anybody who isn't that guy who wants to keep, I really need wood here so I can build a road. I'll give 4 sheep, 5 sheep, 6 sheep, and it just delays
Nobody wants your sheep, Bill.
the whole game. And so that's my number one. It's just the plain old race to 10 version of Catan. I think doesn't get the love that it deserves because kind of like you were talking about with chess, Catan is also one of those things where it can really turn people off. And I think it's a great game. It's one that I try to play every year. I got it in at the very beginning of 2023, so it's been almost a year since I've played it. Actually, it's been just over a year. So that's my number one.
Was that the fancy deluxe version?
No, that was just my nephew's base game. The fancy deluxe is still in shrink behind me, Doug. We got to get going and crack that thing open and have a game.
Yeah, this would definitely be my number one on the modern classic route. I don't understand the hate that gets directed to that game whatsoever, especially with how many people it brought into the hobby and is still being sold like gangbusters today.
It's just fun.
Great choice, Michael. My number one is the simplest game on my list, possibly, and that is Uno. 1971, Mattel and Merle Robbins. I think Uno is fast playing. It's simple. People get it. It has a great way of teaching that take that and, if you want to play a game that plays fast and is going to get your kids over the I'm going to cry when things don't go my way portion of gaming, play Uno.
Yeah.
Because it moves fast enough and they're going to have good turns and they're going to win some and they're going to lose some. And you can get another game that has a whole bunch of licensed variations that you can, increase the engagement. I have a WWE version of Uno. I have a Marvel version of Uno. And, if you want to play something that's in that, llama type feel, the card shedding, all of that type of stuff is in Uno. And I shouldn't
Doug,
say
I
with
had
all...
no idea that you were as big of a fan because Eliza's going to be your buddy as soon as my 8-year-old finds out that Doug likes Uno. Just wait, she'll sit right next to you in church and start throwing down cards.
It's one of them that I think it becomes like when I think of the games that don't get the respect. It's not that people hate on them. Certainly,
people do hate on Uno though.
But they do, yeah, and Monopoly they do, and you're not getting Guess Who haters or whatever. But it's like people just don't acknowledge them as legitimate games. Like, if you want to lump that in with Candyland, I'm sorry, Candyland is hot garbage. There are no choices. It's not a quality game. These are quality games that hold up, and there's a reason that they keep getting published. I don't know why Candyland keeps getting published, but I digress. My number one is Uno. The only other one that didn't make my list that I considered was Operation, which I think is just a fun, delightful dexterity game. How about you? Any other honorable mentions for you?
Yeah, I had Ticket to Ride in here as an honorable mention. But again, I think you did a nice job of delineating the modern classics from the classic classics. So
sure.
And Monopoly was also an honorable mention. I brought those 7 to the table today.
Another one, probably another good one, is Battleship.
Yeah.
That probably doesn't get enough love as it should. Love to hear from the folks on Discord This was brought on by a brief discussion that some folks were having a couple weeks ago on this topic. So I'm curious to see if there's any other ones that we missed that people think may have been overlooked. Send your hate mail about Candyland to Michael.
No, I hate Candyland. Ooh, it's a bad one.
I'd rather play Moving Statue than Candyland, and that's saying a lot. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. If you like what we're doing, subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on X at GameSchoolerU. Reminder, check out the Discord. Great community there, gameschooler.com/Discord. Next week, we're going to be talking about Pyramido, storytelling in gaming, and games from the last 3 years we still want to play. So maybe we can connect and play those games.
That will be a top 25 list.
Yeah, exactly. Top 50. Top games from 3 years ago I'm just finding out about. How about that? That'll be another top 5. So thanks for listening, and thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Now get out there and keep gaming.